Good morning, everybody. If we could take a seat and maybe take some seats closer to the front, we'll begin our presentation. Yeah, this is a perfectly good table. There's nothing bad at this table that will happen to you if you sit at it. It's not like if you sit in the front of the classroom. Yeah, move on up. Come on up.
I've rotten tomatoes here.
Yeah. We're not going to make you come to the classroom board and do algebra problems. We promise. Watch out, that chair's, you got it, okay. It was looking kind of far away. Well, welcome, everybody. I'm not sure who here knows Dr. Cheryl Wiesen. Some of you do, some of you don't. You do. But not everybody does. And Cheryl is so many things. She's well known in this community for her amazing life-saving work as a breast cancer surgeon, and is still, even in retirement, called upon to help give her wisdom and guidance in that very special area of medicine. In addition to that, Cheryl is a great friend to all who know her, just a constant, steady, and wise person. Also, what is your role at Helm?
I am the director of the Board of Trustees.
Yeah. So also involved in guiding Helm in our community. And for those of you that don't know what Helm is, they offer services for people in retirement to people within the Grosse Points. So, and one of our parishioners. So it came out of our community and is still being served by a member of our community. So Cheryl has agreed to come in today and talk to us about healthy longevity, a really important topic, and not one that you should only begin to think about after a certain age. One you should be, or an incident, yes. It is a topic you need to be thinking about throughout your adult years, not only for planning for your own future, but also to support and help your elders, people in your life, or your neighbors and your friends. So with no further ado, Cheryl, thank you so much.
Thank you and good morning. And with full disclosure, I have no special credentials to talk about healthy longevity, but I will do my best to share with you the things that I've learned and answer any questions you may have, and feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm more than happy to do my best to answer questions. So what is healthy longevity? It is really maintaining our physical, mental, and social health throughout the entirety of our lives. What we hope for ourselves and our loved ones and strangers that we don't know is that our well life, our health life, will be the same as our physical life, so that throughout our life, we are able to enjoy family and friends and social connections. So really, why am I interested in this topic? Well, as Mother Maureen explained, I'm on the board of directors of the Helm. I've been involved in the Helm for the past 3 or 4 years. Some of you may remember the Helm as it used to be Services for Older Citizens, SOC, and started about 48 years ago. So it's been in our community for a long time. But before my time at the Helm, they changed the name from Services for Older Citizens because people didn't want to be an older citizen. It brought up the vision of bingo and other kinds of activities, and as our population has aged, we've all heard that 60 is the new 40, and so people who were in their 60s and 70s and 80s didn't want to be an older citizen. They were too young to be old. So the name the Helm was envisioned to say this is the guiding of our life journey. And there isn't, as Mother Maureen mentioned, there isn't really an age. It is a process and one of life's journeys that we go on. And the second reason I'm interested is I am aging. You may not believe that, but I too am aging, and my parents are aging, and so that process has made me be increasingly interested in exploring the data that's out there, and there's really a lot of things. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the demographics of aging. I'm going to discuss the nurses study and the factors that they identified to help us have healthy lives. I'm going to talk about the blue zones. Most of you have probably heard about the blue zones and the 9 characteristics that are associated with longevity that they identified. Then I'm going to talk about the epidemic of loneliness and isolation in our country. And that's a study that came out from the U.S. Surgeon General's office in 2023, and it really is an epidemic. And although most of my talk is going to be focused on the aging population, I think much of what I talk about we can apply to the youth and middle adults in our population. Because really, in the world today, there's an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. And those implications are far-reaching, and how we can address those start with our individual, starts with our community, and extends beyond the walls that we're in today. And so just thinking about that and understanding that a little bit better, I think, provides us with the opportunity for the future, because it's going to be important. It is important already. So by 2028, all baby boomers are going to be over age 65. That's a huge number of people, and some of you in this room probably in the baby boomer population. And the population of individuals over 65 is the largest growing population segment in our country. That's a change from what has been true previously. Also, by 2028, the number of individuals in Southeast Michigan who are over 65 will be greater than the number of children less than age 18. That's a huge shift in the weight of the populations to have so many of us over 65. 1 in 5 people will be over 65 in 2028. So look around, 1 in 5 of you. It's been, maybe a little more, it's been called the silver tsunami, and it's really an important understanding of how that's going to impact our life and our society. So one of the things that was first studied was the nurses study and follow-up of the health professions study that identified 5 key factors that affect longevity. We all know these factors. We've heard about them so many times. To eat well, have a healthy diet with lots of fruits and vegetables, to maintain healthy weight, no smoking, moderate alcohol intake, and exercise. And those things, I think, we know. We don't always follow them as well as we might, but we know those factors. And then the Blue Zone study came out, and the Blue Zones were based on the findings of 6 areas in the world where a much larger number of individuals live to be greater than 100. And so that term, Blue Zones, was coined by Dan Buettner, who wrote the book and did the Netflix productions on Blue Zones. And he was tasked with identifying where these areas are in the world, and was provided grants by the National Institute of Aging and the National Geographic Society. So he and his researchers went around the world and identified 6 areas in the world that had this incredible longevity. And the goal of the study was to see if there was commonality between the blue zones that we could apply to other communities and our own lifestyles. And so the 6 blue zones, which you may know already, are Loma Linda, California, Sardinia, Italy, Icaria, Greece, the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, Okinawa, Japan, and Singapore. And so the researchers spent several years going and spending time in these communities and really getting to know the population and seeing what their lifestyles were like. And they identified 9 lifestyle characteristics that they felt were common amongst those 6 communities, and really explained some of the excessive overaging that they had. They divided it into 4 different categories. One is to eat wisely. Again, back to the nurses' study and the things that we have talked about. But they have an interesting approach, the 80% rule. So rather than eating until you're full, you eat until you're no longer hungry. Those of us that grew up with clean your plate or else and the supersizer of the American diet, I don't know that we really have embraced the 80% rule, but that's been something that they identified. And it's key. When you're no longer hungry, you don't need to continue to eat, no matter what's left on your plate. The next thing is to have a plant-focused diet. Doesn't mean to necessarily avoid all meat and fish and dairy, but to emphasize the plant in our diet. So fruits and vegetables and beans and legumes, and have the meat be the accent, not necessarily the focus of the diet. This also, I think, is something that we've sort of heard about, but not everyone has incorporated into their lifestyles. And the one that's really my favorite is a glass of wine at 5. Emphasis on glass, not glasses of wine. But all these communities had a culture of getting together with family and friends and sitting and enjoying a glass of wine or another spirit, but mostly wine, and spending time with one another. The only exception to that is Loma Linda, which is Seventh-day Adventist, and they don't drink alcohol. But they probably have iced tea or something else instead. But the concept of, yes.
Did it make any difference whether it was red or white?
All of these areas really were drinking red wine primarily, but it wasn't studied specifically about what kind. And in fact, you can see there's sort of a common theme. These aren't really separate aspects. So the glass of wine is probably the sitting around the table and chatting and interacting with people. It's not sitting in front of the TV by yourself and enjoying your glass of wine, because that was not part of what they identified in these communities. The second aspect is moving. We talk about moving at least 30 minutes a day of moderate exercise, and you can walk, and hard, again, in the United States because we don't have really a walking tradition. And in these communities, what they observed was more than just walking 30 minutes a day. They were moving all day long and were really moving every 15 or 20 minutes throughout their day, whether it was walking to friends, working in the garden, doing other kinds of activities, housework, many other things, but moving sort of all day long. That doesn't work so well in our computer-focused, work-from-home kind of environments. It's hard to move as commonly as they observed in these communities. And then the third aspect is the right outlook. So to have a purpose in life, a reason to get up in the morning. In these communities, older individuals were embraced, their experience and wisdom was appreciated. They were very much integrated into the community. And so that helped give them purpose for continuing their life. And the other aspect of the right outlook is to downshift, to find ways to diminish stress. We all have stress, they all had stress, but they had routines that helped them diminish the stress, whether that was meditation or yoga or emotional support from family and friends, they were able to take that stress that occurs and decrease it and have it be less a part of their being. And the last thing that was critically important was connection. So to have your loved ones first in what you do is to pay attention to them and support them and be available to them, to belong. And all of these communities have a big faith-based aspect to their community. Didn't matter really what the faith was. It varied some between these communities, but to have a faith-based community and to belong. So you being here is an example of what that can and ideally is. And then to have the right tribe. And by that is to have social circles that really support strong friends and emotional support, to have encouraging diet and exercise and health treatments, go get your colonoscopy, have your mammogram, those kinds of things from your social circle. It's possible to have the wrong tribe who does things that are not supportive of our health and well-being, but these six communities had the right tribe of supporting each other and helping each other. So those were the 9 characteristics that they identified in the blue zones. These lifestyle characteristics really are pretty well known to most of us. What's less well known is the results of a study by Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad and her colleagues. In 2010, they did a meta-analysis called Social Relationships and Mortality Risk. Dr. Holt-Lunstad is a professor of psychology and neuroscience and director of Social Connection and Health Lab at Brigham Young University. And their meta-analysis looked at 148 studies of over 300,000 individuals, where they were identifying the social connections of those individuals and then following them for 7.5 years to see their mortality risk. And they were able to demonstrate a 50% increased likelihood of survival in those participants who had the strongest social relationships. 50% increased survival. That's remarkable. And that finding was consistent across age and sex and initial health status. So the social connections had a remarkable influence. Humans are social beings. When our social needs are met or unmet, there's dysregulation of our biologic systems, and it leads to the development of disease. I think most of us have some sense of the findings in the 1940s where in orphanages, children were provided food and a place to live, but no social connection, nobody paying attention to them and loving them and interacting with them. And those children did not thrive. Many of them died from the lack of social interaction. These findings of Dr. Holt-Lundstrom and her colleagues were really unrecognized, not really paid attention to in 2010. A number of other studies were done that were showing similar results. And in 2015, she and her colleagues gathered all the available global data for 3.5 million participants. And they examined the association between loneliness, social isolation, and mortality risk. And it's important to understand the difference between loneliness and social isolation. They're really quite distinct. Loneliness is the person's perception of not belonging and not having social relationships. And so from someone looking at an individual, they might not recognize that they feel lonely, but it's their own personal perception. And social isolation is really an objective look at the number of social relationships, the frequency of contacts with social interactions, and an objective measure of the social connection. it's possible to be lonely, but not socially isolated. Somebody who goes to all kinds of things and is really out there in the community, but is feeling lonely and not belonging. Or, in contrast, there can be somebody who's not doing very much, is kind of isolated, but is still not lonely and not perceiving that they're lonely. So the two factors together really are our measure of social connection. And that's what Dr. Holt-Lundstrom and her colleagues were looking at. And amongst the initially healthy people that were studied over time, loneliness was associated with a 26% increased risk of premature death of all causes, and associated with a 50% increase in dementia. Social isolation had a 29% increase in premature death. These are really important factors associated with our longevity. And on average, people with strong social connections are happier, healthier, and live longer. Happier, healthier, and live longer. Correct. That's correct. Yes. Yes. It's just an observation that these factors are associated with. But that's certainly a contributing factor for sure. Yes. So loneliness and isolation are associated with greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. Before the pandemic, 1 in 2 adults in America reported feeling lonely. And 24% of Americans and older are socially isolated by the criteria of looking at social connections and social relationships. Older adults are at risk for social isolation because of living alone, loss of family and friends, chronic illness, and sensory impairments. If you can't hear, it's hard to be socially engaged. And in 2010, individuals in the United States reported having 3 close friends, and the most recent numbers are 1 or 2 close friends. So our connection with other people is decreasing. There's lots of reasons for the social isolation. There's less intergenerational living, greater social mobility, delayed marriages, dual careers, increased single household living situations, and increasing age-related disability. So, to Dr. Marsh's question, how could social connection affect these factors? What might be some of the causation? And these are not proven, but they are hypotheses of how social connections can actually be affecting this. And there are 3 pathways that are contributing to this and are hypothesized to be part of the causality of social isolation and increased mortality. They're biology, psychology, and behavior. So biology influences our stress hormones. It can cause increased inflammation when we're socially isolated or lonely, and is thought to affect and is being shown to affect our gene expression. Psychology gives meaning and purpose to our life, can affect stress, safety, resilience, hopefulness. And the behaviors are influenced by the physical things that we've talked about: physical activity, nutrition, sleep, smoking, health treatments. All of these factors coming together can affect the health outcomes. I think we are increasingly aware that inflammation affects our immune system. And so if these factors are impacting the inflammatory response in our body, it could directly affect our immune system, which can have profound influences in a variety of different health outcomes. And so heart disease, stroke, cancer, and diabetes are the categories of disease that seem to be affected primarily in the lack of social connections. So we have an obligation and an opportunity to build more connected lives and have a more connected society. Yes? Yep. So the question is social media and our technology and how that impacts. And that's really beyond what I've looked into, but is clearly, I think, related to the lack of connectivity and relationships. When our interaction is by text or looking at the phone, we're not interacting, we're not looking face to face, we're not having a conversation, we're not seeing somebody be wiggling uncomfortably in their chair because they're distressed. If you're looking on your phone, you're not picking up on those social cues. And this is my own hypothesis, but our children aren't learning those social cues. They're not seeing the nod that tells you you're listening. They're not seeing the turning because what you're saying or what they're feeling is uncomfortable. You don't get any of those, or you get very few of those social cues on media. So I think it's profound and really worth a lot of study, much more than anything that today's discussion would have, but is a worry to me, frankly, about the future of our society, because we're losing that interaction and the ability to be the social beings that we are biologically. So I just wanted to list some of the things that Christ Church does. Sunday Forum, the music program, Owls, Common Thread, Bible study, Rebuild Together, Crossroads. Those are just a few of the things that we do, that Father Drew and Mother Maureen and everyone working together tries to build the social context and connections that we have. So if you're not seeing someone, give them a call, write them a note, say that you'd like to see them again. Other countries have started addressing this more so than the United States. In 2018, and I was actually amazed to read this, Prime Minister Theresa May appointed a minister of loneliness. I don't know if I'd want to be a minister of loneliness. But the minister of loneliness was tasked to really address loneliness and to make recommendations of how that could be impacted. And as not directly related to that minister of loneliness, but in 2021, a kind challenge was performed. It was a randomized study of 4,500 participants in the US, the UK, and Australia. And the participants were divided into not doing anything, and half of the participants were asked to make small acts of kindness to their neighbors. And over a period of time that this study was held, they saw striking results in decreased reports of loneliness, decreased stress, and not surprisingly, less conflict with neighbors. So simple things can make a difference. And that kind challenge was one study that really got to that. So we can begin in our own lives to strengthen connections and relationships. You can write a note, invite friends for a meal, make a phone call, volunteer. And by taking these small steps, strengthen the relationships and support our community. we can help the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And the benefits to society are beyond the individual, and I think that's the important thing to realize as well. It's not just that we have the potential to benefit and our friends have the potential to benefit, but there's improved public health, community safety, resilience, prosperity, and functioning of government, maybe. So thank you very much. I'm happy to try to answer any questions I can. Father Drew has. Father Drew.
Early on, when you were speaking about the blue zones, you made a distinction between community and tribes. I think that's a really profound.
That's interesting.
For us to have both, but it's really important for us to understand the difference between the two. And I wonder if you could just explore that, the differences a little bit. So what makes a tribe and what makes a community distinct from
Yeah.
a tribe?
So I think the community is a larger organization, a larger cultural entity, whether it's defined by a zip code or certain streets. It's talking about a larger community. And the tribe is the personal relationships that individuals within that space have with one another. Now, there's probably multiple tribes that any one person belongs to, a work tribe, a club that you may belong to, your street, your church. So there's many different tribes that work together, but in the blue zones, when they talk about tribe, it's mostly that tight group of individuals that you can count on, that you can pick up the phone or walk to and say, you know what, I'm really struggling today. I've just whatever. And that person will be there, or that group of people will be there and help you through that process. And I know we've all seen and heard of situations like that where an unexpected death, and all of a sudden 3 or 4 friends come and they sit and be present with that individual who's experiencing that sudden profound loss. Cheryl. Yes, yes. And I was going to say, yeah. And so addressing that and understanding that, and grief comes in many ways. It is not to diminish those losses which are real, but there's other grief of losing your sense of identity because you lost your job, or retirement. I mean, there's lots and lots of different ways that different causes for grief. Yes. Yes, it takes a village, yes. The circle groups, yes. Yeah, and I think my personal thought is that it's difficult to mandate a relationship. It really has to grow from the bottom up, providing opportunities for that to happen. But I think that it's difficult when that gets mandated. Yes.
I thought you gave a very, very interesting talk, actually. I think the social isolation of the elderly really is important, but the social isolation of the young is equally important.
I agree.
There's some really interesting animal experiments with mice. If you put mice into a situation of sensory deprivation, take a second group and give them an exercise wheel, take a third group and put them into a really enriched environment and let them live in these three environments, and the equivalent would be exposing the third group to art, exposing the third group to religiosity, and allowing some spiritual growth, although I don't know whether mice really have spiritual growth. But if you look at these three groups of animals, this experiment's been done in Cambridge. The first group's brain, when you look at them after they've grown for a period of time, is much smaller than the group that were fully stimulated. The life of the three groups is very different. So this sort of social deprivation, it's both artistic exposure and exposure to contact with other members of the tribe and the community.
Yeah.
Does have a significant effect on longevity in these animals, and it bolsters what you're talking about in terms of the studies which have been done on
Yes, probably true.
really provocative, comment, a couple of provocative thoughts from Dr. Marsh there, and that relate into our life here at Christ Church or beyond. Um, what that study articulates is the importance of structure within community. So it's not accidental that that third group had a more vibrant life, but it wasn't also mandated upon those mice. It was a structured opportunity for them to live a broader, if you will, experience. And so part of what makes community vibrant to me seems to be the structure for community. So this owls comes to mind. It's not a mandated participation, but it's a structured offering of community. Our Sunday school is not a mandated program, but a structured opportunity for growth and community. Circle groups, again, one of those structured opportunities for fellowship and community. So thinking about the intentional structures that build that vibrant life, that not only the mice in the experiment experience, but the communities that you're speaking about. That community isn't purely accidental, but intentionally formed. Another thing that Dr. Marsh just reminded me of, and something you said very early on, Cheryl, about the biological impact of community. A similar study on mice, on rats actually, ironically, at birth, rats have as do many animals, have a practice of cleaning their newborns. The mother licking and cleaning the newborns. And the study looked at two sets of newly born, some that were traditionally nurtured by their mothers and some that were separated and never cleaned. And they found two things. That the biology of the brain was fundamentally changed by the act of cleaning. That certain proteins were released and broken down in the brains of those newborn mice that were cleaned in that act of cleaning. That stimulation impacted their brains that was different from those who were not. And then secondly, that the third intergeneration. So those mice they cleaned and cared for their young fundamentally differently than those mice that were not cleaned at birth. I mean, so all of this realization that external experiences of care, of nurture and community have real life biological impact on us from our earliest days and perhaps to our oldest. So just reinforcing that learning that compassion and community impacts us in more ways than just social.
Well, and I think what ties into that for humans, not rats, is that one of the gifts of a church community is the intergenerational interaction. So while if you only stay within your little age set, it's very sterile. And one of the things that we can hope our kids are getting from being here is interacting with all these different ages of people who did not grow up staring at a phone, and who are hopefully being not knowing it, but being challenged to make more eye contact, to find ways to relate better to the people around them than how they would only relate to their own age group. But the same goes for every age group present, that we all are challenged. It's got to be good for our brains, right? We all have different experiences that we bring into the mix. So opportunities to be, say, with owls, where it's 55 and better, men and women, that's important. But also like Thursday night dinner, where we have babies on up through our oldest members sitting at the same table. All of these things are necessary. There's not just one little solution to the problem. Any other thoughts?
A powerful book I read on this topic is Breaking the Age Code.
Yes.
Talks about the discrimination against old people and how very important it is to think well of yourself.
And I think that's something that these blue zone communities did not have so much of age discrimination. They were intergeneration and appreciated for what they could offer, which we don't see as much in this country.
Cheryl?
Yes.
That's remarkable. Without that positive attitude, that life probably feels just as long, right? So it's, I mean, it's sad when people are just miserable and you can't shake them out of it. Well, thank you so much, Cheryl.
Thank you.
I'm sure if people have further questions, Cheryl will be happy to answer them.
Thanks.
Congratulations on the village.
Oh, thank you. I meant to bring a Helm journal. I forgot to bring it with me. I'm sorry.